All right, let's get into a demo of a Reading for Evidence activity. If students are completing a Reading for Evidence activity for the first, second, or third time, they will see some introductory pages that introduce them to Reading for Evidence, and they'll be able to click the next buttons to move through these introductory pages. These pages communicate to students that they'll be receiving feedback from Quill and that their teacher will see their score and responses. Once they've seen all of the introductory pages, they will click the Start button to start the activity. The first section in a Reading for Evidence activity involves reading and highlighting the text. In this case, the task is highlighting two sentences that describe how seaweed can reduce the impact that cowburps have on the environment. So now I'm going to read the text and highlight two sentences about that key idea. Once students have read the text and completed the task, they will click the Done button and the Next button to move on to the next section of the activity, during which they will complete sentence stems using evidence from the text. The directions are that we have to use information exclusively from the text, and we have to put the information in our own words, which means we cannot use quotes or plagiarize. So the first sentence stem is the because stem. Feeding cows seaweed can reduce the impact cowburps have on the environment because, and I'm going to complete the sentence stem by writing, they cause global warming. When I click the Get Feedback button, I see that my response is incorrectly focused on the impact of cowburps rather than the effect of feeding cows seaweed, so I'm told to try again. In addition, below the feedback, I see a hint which shows me the function of the word because. So instead, let's write, feeding cows seaweed can reduce the impact cowburps have on the environment because it can decrease the methane they produce. When I click the Get Feedback button, I see that I'm correctly talking about the impact of feeding cows seaweed, but my response is still not specific enough. So here you are seeing a hallmark of Reading for Evidence, because Reading for Evidence will always encourage students to be as precise as possible. So instead, let's write, it can decrease the methane they produce by a lot. When I click the Get Feedback button, I still see the feedback that my response is still not specific enough. So I see the feedback to reread the highlighted text to find a specific percentage. So notice something here. The scaffolding of the text being highlighted has only appeared when I've missed the specificity that the tool is looking for more than once. So the tool recognizes the scale of how much a student might be struggling and provides different levels of scaffolding based on the scale. So now I'm going to reread the highlighted text and see the percentage that the tool wants me to include. So instead of by a lot, I'll write by 99%. And when I click the Get Feedback button, I now see that my response is strong and that I've correctly used information from the text. I want to call your attention to this number in the lower left corner of the response field. So for each sentence stem, students have up to 5 attempts to submit a correct response. And if they don't submit a correct response by the 5th attempt, they will be automatically moved on to the next sentence stem. This limit of 5 attempts is purposeful because we want students to get enough practice, but we don't want them to get overly frustrated or stuck on a sentence stem. So now I'm going to click the Next button and move on to the But stem. Again, we have the same stem of feeding cows seaweed can reduce the impact cow burps have on the environment. However, now we have the joining word but. So let's write feeding cows seaweed can reduce the impact cow burps have on the environment, but there is currently not enough Asparagopsis seaweed available to feed all of the cows around the world. When I click the Get Feedback button, I see that my idea is correct, but this is plagiarism because this is a direct quotation from the text. So students will be discouraged from incorporating direct quotations in reading for evidence activities. I do want to note that when writing essays, direct quotations are an important part, but this is not the focus of reading for evidence. So in reading for evidence, students will be encouraged to paraphrase. And beneath the feedback, I also see a hint of how I might paraphrase the text. So let's rewrite. There isn't enough Asparagopsis seaweed for every cow. And when I click the Get Feedback button, I now see that I've written a strong response. Another thing that I want to point out here is this Report a Problem link that students can click if they believe that a specific piece of feedback is off. Clicking this link will prompt the student to give feedback, and our curriculum team will be automatically notified of their feedback. Now I'm going to click the next button and move on to the last stem, which is the sow stem. So feeding cows seaweed can reduce the impact cow burps have on the environment, so we should make more seaweed. When I click the Get Feedback button, I see the feedback that discourages me from drawing conclusions or making claims based on opinions. Rather, I am encouraged to stick to the evidence in the text. And I want to recognize here that as teachers, you might want your students to draw their own conclusions from the text they read. But when completing reading for evidence activities, Quill wants students to focus on evidence-based writing that pulls evidence from the text. So let's rewrite. Companies around the world are growing seaweed. And when I click the Get Feedback button, I'm sure that you all have noticed that I've deliberately misspelled seaweed. And now that I've demonstrated that I understand the text and that I've paraphrased, Quill is focusing on my mechanics. So Quill will prioritize the student first getting the idea right and paraphrasing before pointing out any errors in mechanics. So let's spell seaweed correctly and rewrite. Companies around the world are growing seaweed. And when I click the Get Feedback button, I see that I've done a nice job and submitted a strong response. And now we've completed this reading for evidence activity. I'm going to click the Done button. And when students finish a reading for evidence activity, they will be brought to this page that celebrates them for making all of the revisions that they did, and that gives them a chance to compare their own responses to some other strong responses. So this is a really great page to leverage for class discussion. When students click the last Next button, they will be able to provide their overall feedback on the activity, which is really helpful to us at Quill, but I do want to note that providing this feedback is optional, so students can always click this skip link. And lastly, when a student completes a reading for evidence activity, they will see this page that shows them their proficiency and percentage score they earned on the reading for evidence activity. When they click the View Results button, they will be able to see even more information about their performance. And for each writing stem, they will see each of their responses, as well as each of the pieces of feedback they received. And finally, to return to the to-do activities page in their Quill account, they will click this All Activities button in the upper left corner of the page.